For those of you that are online, I think y'all had access to this. You could print it off. And I was just sharing, if you've just joined us, that I'm a big outline person. So I'm going to just be going through. We're going to move kind of quickly because we're running a little bit behind in terms of the overall schedule. And I'll try to leave some time for questions at the end. If you don't have a chance to ask a question in this room, which would be most helpful for everybody to hear at the same time. But if we do run out of time, you can come up and we can talk later. So what about surviving siblings? And one of the things about siblings is that their grief is often overlooked. I mentioned in my general session that a lot of times people treat siblings like they're disinterested third parties to this whole process, and they will talk to them as if they're not also active grievers. So that's one of the problems that we have. Frequently and understandably, the focus is on the parents, but siblings have lost someone too. Siblings need support and care, yet parents may not be able to give that right now because of their own grief. That's something that I think all of us have experienced at some point, whether it was initially or it's ongoing, or for us at 10 years, it's circled back around. There'll be seasons where our children are experiencing intense, I don't want to say dysfunction because that word's overused, but that's kind of what I mean, where they're not able to engage always in healthy ways with their own lives at the moment, and it'll come back around. So we've had times where one or all at the same time, or one will have a smooth patch and then something happens and they hit another bump in the road. And I can tell that the way that they are interacting with that particular challenge in life is a function in part of them being a bereaved sibling. Others may not realize they need to talk about need space and time to process and require help facilitating the work grief requires. This is true across the board, all ages, but it's especially true sometimes for younger kids. There's not a lot of space and grace or I should say really for school age kids. It's true for all the ages, but especially school age kids. People look at kids and they think, oh, they're resilient. Kids are resilient. Kids can get through anything. They're going to be okay. And a lot of times from the outside, kids look like they're okay because that's what young people do. If they like to skateboard, they're still skateboarding. If they like to play football, they're still playing football. They don't always withdraw and internalize. Well, they do internalize, but they don't withdraw in a way that's recognizable to others that they're having this struggle. So that's one of the things that people don't see. Siblings may have trouble expressing their grief, and so others assume they're okay. Kids tend to revert to center and typical usual behavior. They may go back to school or even play with friends, eat, go to the movies, etc., and appear as if nothing has changed at all. But children, young people, well, none of us, but especially children, they're not infinitely resilient. They're not silly putty. They're people and they get broken just like we do. Number 2, sibling grief is different in kind, but not degree. That's another thing that's often misunderstood and misrepresented in media, misrepresented. Even, I'll be honest, even counselors, unless they are specifically child counselors, they will not understand that a child is grieving just as hard as an adult. And that goes across many situations, but in this particular one, the parent-child relationship is one which many adults understand and can relate to. But if this is more for adult siblings and children than young children who are bereaved siblings, adult siblings, folks aren't nearly as focused on their ongoing sibling relationships. So, if you're grown and you still have living siblings yourself, or you have siblings, you're not as close to your sibling for most of us because you move, you have your own family, you have your own interests. So a lot of adults don't think about children still in the home and how loss impacts them in those specific relationships. people who might be available to offer support might not think to reach out because they don't recognize the need. And as bereaved parents, we understand that too. Many of us have had friends that we thought were going to be the people to reach out. And like I said earlier, sometimes it's not they're mean. They just don't understand. They don't comprehend the depth of the loss. They don't understand that this is a lifetime adjustment, that this is something that circles back around over and over. You have days, particular days that bring it back up fresh again, and you need support. Well, kids do too. Siblings lose the physical presence of their sister or brother. They lose the parents they knew. They lose the family they knew. Their world is just as shattered as us as parents. It's just as shattered, and it's shattered in a lot of different directions, just like ours is. The support system they would normally turn to in times of crisis has been fundamentally altered. Think about that for just a minute. As devastated as we might be that our best friend didn't show up for us when we experience the loss of a child, imagine how some kids feel when their parents are so shattered. And this is not to lay a guilt trip on anybody. It's just to say it's a reality. They're so shattered, they're so internalized that they are no longer the support system. Where do your kids usually go to for support? To us. They have a bad day at school. Where do they go? To us. They have someone who's mean to them. Where do they go? To us. Well, suddenly we don't have any energy left. We're just barely hanging on ourselves. Siblings on average will live with this loss longer than parents. Think about that. I remember when that really dawned on me. My kids are going to live with their loss of their brother, all things being equal, which we know they're not, but been longer than I will. Number 3, siblings may feel a responsibility to try to fix the parent-family situation. Wildly untrue stories can be invented by children in an attempt to make sense of the senseless. I had a very dear friend that I went to church with years and years ago. Her brother died in World War II. There was a lot of years between them. Brother was in the war. He died. Away from home, nothing to do with this kid. She got in her head that she was responsible for his death. And she lived with that for decades before she was ever brave enough to broach that subject with her own parents. And so she operated in this delusion for decades and lived a life of trying to make up for what she thought she had done. This is not uncommon. It is not uncommon for small children to sometimes have a sense that somehow, I would say small up through teens, to have that they had something to do with a death that they had nothing to do with. So just be aware that that can happen. I covered this earlier in the primary session. It's also not uncommon for people to ask the child about the family or about their parent. Make sure you preempt that with your kids. And I don't care how old your kids are. My kids in their 30s, people will still sometimes ask them. Tell them they don't have to say, they're not the reporter. Say, I think you need to talk to mom about that or dad about that, or they can give just a pat answer. Well, pretty good considering how devastating the loss is, and then just move on. If somebody keeps prodding them, tell them that it is okay to just say, I'm sorry, I don't feel comfortable talking about that. Especially if you're in a smaller community, or if they're still in school, a lot of times people will prod them for information. Children may shoulder an outsized and unfair burden that they must make up somehow for all the loss and sadness. That happens so often. They try to be better. They try to make better grades. They try to make you proud. Kids, depending on the dynamics in your family, this can already be a thing that's going on, or it may be brand new. They think somehow they've got to make mom happy. They've got to make dad better. They've got to take on extra responsibilities so that mom and or dad are not so sad or so upset or so overwrought. And that is it's an unfair burden for any child, regardless of their age, because that's not the role of a child in a family. They are not the parent. It's like I used to always think sometimes your child will do something when they're young. They'll kick you in the shin because they get mad because something's not right. And your initial response is you want to snap that little kid, but you can't. You're the parent. You're still the parent. I don't care if your child is grown, has their own family. It is not their responsibility to fix what we all know can't be fixed anyway. And you need to sometimes, we were in a group with the moms earlier yesterday, and somebody was talking about opening up the communication, Carol Brown. And sometimes as the parent, you've got to go to your child and be the one to name the hard thing, to say, yeah, there's this thing. I'm afraid that you're trying to make us better. You're trying to fix us. And I just want you to know, honey, you can't do that. And I don't expect you to do that. And I really want you to take your energy and, and I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I feel the love that's the impetus for that. But I want you to take care of you. And we still have to be the parent. Parents need to be honest about death, loss, and fate. Don't pretend, admit the hard, allow children to see you grieve. This is a biggie for me. There are so many adults that grow up into unhealthy grieving patterns because they've seen that modeled for them in the home. You can't hide that it hurts. And if you try, or if you shut down your children when they express the pain and the hurt, you are codifying for them, you're cementing for them, because they're still malleable, so much more malleable than adults are. Bad coping mechanisms, poor coping mechanisms, ineffective coping mechanisms. And it goes for the grief, it goes for the pain, and it goes for faith. It's really amazing. None of us who shared in the primaries, in the main sessions, talked to one another ahead of time. I mean, we spoke to each other, but we didn't communicate about what we were going to share. And when I was listening to Jim in this last one before we do the panel discussion thing at the end this evening, it's crazy how it all meshed together. It's crazy how the same themes come up over and over and over again. And one of the things that all of us spoke about was being honest about the challenge that child loss and sibling loss is to your faith in a loving, omniscient, omnipresent, and supreme God. I mean, you can try to skirt that idea, but if you're honest, you got to ask the question. And who better to guide your children through that exploration process than someone who is also honestly trying to work through it themselves? And if you don't know an answer, it's okay. Either go and get some help, somebody you trust, read a book, go online, read scripture yourself. However you approach your own theological explanations, try to do it with a safe and honest and trusted individual, someone that's sound, that's biblically sound, that has strong faith, and come back to your child. Or if they're older, explore together. Again, be the parent, be the person who names the elephant in the room, because your children almost always are going to be tiptoeing around you in one form or fashion because they don't want to make it worse. We were talking about that in the moms group. They don't want to make it worse. They want to take something off of us, not add something to us. And if you're honest, then you're giving them permission to be honest too. And I don't know about you guys, but one of the most beneficial practices that I've learned in working toward healing, and I know some people don't like the word healing. I don't think we're ever healed on this earth, but I think we can move toward wholeness, toward healing, toward a more authentic life, and one that it's not all sadness and sorrow. And when our kids see that, then they also know that that's possible. And again, back to what I said before, they're going to live with this longer than we do. All things, being equal. Siblings should be able to choose how much of their story is told to others. This is a tricky one. If you have school-age children, well, if you may have preschool kids, and that's a whole other thing. But if you have school-age children in particular, there's some things that are going to have to be disclosed. There's some things you're going to have to tell people. And I think sometimes parents struggle with, do I tell? If I tell, is my child going to be labeled within the context of a classroom or a Sunday school class or wherever your kids may be participating in things? It could be extracurricular activities. But if you don't say anything, then when it's a sibling's birthday, or it's the anniversary of a death, or it's just or holidays, then the responsible adult who's interacting with your child is not going to be in a place where they can understand what they're seeing. They may see tears in the classroom and misunderstand that. And so you'll want to be telling, I just want you to know that our son died last year, and and Johnny may be a little tearful at certain times. And if you have any questions, you can come to me. Now I'm talking about little kids that really can't speak for themselves. But your teenagers and your adult children, it's not your business to be telling other people their story. They get to decide how much or how little of that they want to disclose. So like with our adult kids, now mine's a little different because I have the blog, and I never share anything on the blog unless I've asked their permission. So it's a little hard for them to be anonymous. But my daughter, she's dating, and she doesn't start out with, yeah, my brother died. She's going to develop a relationship, and at whatever point she either wants to or doesn't want to, feels comfortable or not comfortable, she may disclose that to somebody. But I'm not going to be the one who says that. If I met somebody in her presence, I don't bring that out then. So let your own children control the information that they share, because it's their story. Their story is within ours, but it's their own story. And they need to be able to control that. Sibling experience enormous pressure to get over their loss. This really couples up with the fact that people underestimate sibling loss. And most schools are ill-equipped to deal with profound loss among students. I don't care how many quote unquote counselors there are in a school. They are overrun. And you have children with all kinds of needs, all kinds of problems, all kinds of difficult situations. It's impossible for a school counselor to be the person who helps all those kids. And most communities outside schools don't have a lot of resources for young people. Don't assume this with your faith leaders either. We used to work in youth ministry as lay leaders, and so many parents want to take their child to church, whether they're having addiction issues, or there's behavior issues, or there's faith questions, or there's, in our case, there's loss in the family, profound loss in the family. And they say, here, they can't do it either, y'all. They can't do it either. First of all, they don't have all the pieces, even aside from the time issue. They don't have all the pieces. They don't know how our families operate. They don't know all the things that this kid's facing in all the different spheres that they're interacting in. They can help you. You can say, hey, I feel like Susie needs somebody to talk to. Do you mind taking her to lunch? maybe once a month or something, and just giving her a safe person to talk to. I don't care if you talk about loss, don't make it a big deal. Just be a friend. That's an appropriate role for someone that's working with your kids. Oh, this is a big one too. Our kids experienced this because they were in college. Most schools do not make accommodations for students who experience the loss of a sibling. It is surprising how inflexible some schools, teachers, colleges, or professors can be with respect to sibling loss. We had two children that were facing, they were both in college. One was in a master's program, one was in an undergraduate program, facing finals. When Dom night, it was finals, right close to finals week. One of them, 0 accommodations. Take the test or else you get an incomplete, or you can choose to fail or whatever, withdraw, fail. The other one had professors that were like, oh, dude, don't worry about it. Not a problem. One of the classes didn't even have to take the final. I mean, he had a good grade up to then. I don't know what the person would have done if he hadn't. The other one, he was given 100% flexibility and said, you can take it anytime. And it was this broad span of time. It was he gave him up to the last day where the prof could get the grade in. So it was like 2 weeks. There's no law that makes schools make accommodations for that. So you may have to advocate for your children. Obviously, our losses have already occurred, but it could be not necessarily another loss, but it could be a significant additional stressor in the family, but they just don't make accommodations. So sometimes you have to advocate, or you have to guide your older students to advocate for themselves for things like that. If a sibling is an adult, they are very rarely able to procure more than the traditional 3 days bereavement, regardless of the circumstances of their sibling's death. It's really sad how we deal with bereavement in this country. I would rank it up there with parental leave when a child is born or adopted. Some places and companies have made some changes, but a lot of them haven't. That's, again, we have already experienced our losses, but just knowing that you might be able to advocate for someone else, and help somebody else. Because siblings may be away at college or have homes of their own, they're often removed from a community who knows about or who can support them in their grief. So that's another thing. If you have married kids, or they were away from the home, out of the home when the loss occurs, and this is an ongoing concern, an ongoing thing, or it can also be you have children that are on the verge of leaving the home. So a loss occurs when you've got, their sibling, they're in the latter teenage years and they get ready to go. Well, when they go away, yes, they should be able to disclose according to their own comfort level what and how much they want to tell people. But at the same time, now they're totally removed from, if they choose not to disclose, they're totally removed from anybody who knows anything about it. So now they're out there, and they don't necessarily have the support that they need because nobody knows, and they might be uncomfortable telling someone. If they're married and their spouse has not experienced the loss of a sibling, or even just any other profound loss, which is highly likely in our early adult years. Many of us had not experienced a profound loss in our early adult years. That can set up strife, in their family, between the two of them, and also in the extended family. Was it you or was it someone else that was talking about a spouse? I know your daughter, but didn't come home, but somebody was talking about how, it was the in-laws, that she had in-laws, and that the in-laws were perfectly content to have the family always go there for the holidays because your daughter, who was the one that had experienced a loss, didn't feel good. It had some strife about coming home. Well, and then that sets up extended strife. Everybody, we're all competing for the grandkids or the who's coming home when. And it's a very complex grief situation and a relationship situation. And again, back to the original observation that oftentimes sibling loss is underestimated and how it impacts a lot of places in children's lives and adult children's lives. Unmarried siblings tend to experience their grief alone. Unmarried adult siblings tend to experience their grief alone. Again, a lot of us have lost children, and the remaining siblings are at that point in life when they're launching, they're moving, they're relocating because of careers, or they're going off to college, or they go into a postgraduate program. And they may have friends, but they don't have friends that are connected to their family of origin. They don't have friends that are connected to their history. And so a lot of times they experience their grief alone. And they just don't have anybody that they can be honest with. And then extend that to a faith community. And a lot of them, because they are launching, they're changing into a church, a different church family, and they don't have anybody that they necessarily feel comfortable talking to about those questions that they may have, or someone that they can bounce ideas off of. We're all here in community with one another, and many of us are experiencing for the first time, or for the first time, and or for a limited time, what it feels like to walk into a room and look around and know that everybody gets it. Was it Jim who said in his talk, he said, it's you may not have the answers, but at least you understand the questions. Well, it's the same for our kids. It's the same for the siblings. They're surrounded by people that they don't even understand the questions. They're not, even if they didn't have answers, just if somebody understood the questions, it would be lovely. And this kind of thing, there are no, as far as I know, there may be, and if somebody knows of any, tell me, there's no conferences like this for bereaved siblings. There's no resources. There's not, in a lot of towns there are, and communities, there's bereaved parent meetings, either online or they meet in person once a month, or however often. They don't exist for the most part for bereaved siblings. I personally do not, and I've got connections across the country. I do not know of any. I don't know of any. So if you feel lonely, think about it for your children. How lonely do you think they feel? I mean, if we get online, we can eventually find somewhere and somebody. This is important too. And it's not just for little ones, although we tend to think of it as for the younger ones. Siblings may experience this loss repeatedly through the years as they age and grow. So there's a point in time, just like we grieve the future that we thought we were going to have, our children, no matter how old they are, and it's really marked when you have very young children, because a lot of times they don't have the language, they don't have the comprehension to even understand what they've lost. And as they age up and they gain language and they gain comprehension, they can begin to express it. But even for adult siblings, so when Dominic died, James Michael, our oldest son but second child, he got married within 2 months. That on June 21st. It had been planned. We knew he was going to get married. Dominic was supposed to be one of his groomsmen. He wasn't there. Okay, so that was an additional loss, very specific. Fiona, our daughter, didn't get married until 2019. And even though it had been 5 years since Dominic died, it was very close to his birthday. And in addition, it, just like for us, certain things will bring it back up really, really fresh. It brought a lot of stuff back up really, really fresh. Well, I can remember us going and looking for candlesticks or something. We were at Hobby Lobby, and she'd been fine. We'd just been talking. We'd been having a good day. And she just burst into tears in the middle of Hobby Lobby. Some people call it hobby sobby or sobby lobby, sobby lobby. That's what they call it, sobby lobby. And she was like, I just never thought I was going to get married and my brother wouldn't be here, which I'm not mocking her. I was totally understood it. But that was something that she didn't really anticipate. I didn't really anticipate it. And it just came out right then and there. And it was a fresh loss. It was a very poignant, unique, fresh loss. It's not just this general, I miss my brother. I am sad because he died. It was very specific. I miss Dominic right now, right here. He's not here for this. And our kids will experience that if they have children and their sibling isn't there to be the uncle or the aunt or the whatever. The absence of one sibling shifts relationships and family dynamics. And this is something that shows up again for decades. A lot of times we can tell when our kids are young, everybody kind of has a role in a family. We used to always joke that the DeSimones came as a committee because everybody had a specialty. Everybody had their thing that they did, and we would walk in, all six of us would come in, and we would do stuff in church, and people were just like, yay, the DeSimones are here, because we all had these little things, and we'd go off in our corners and do all the things. We had Dominic was the tech guy, and he did sound, and they all played instruments, and and I was a teacher and an organizer, and I did food, and Hector did tech stuff, and he also played music. And so everybody had their thing. And when one person, but we have it within our families too. There's a peacemaker, there's a funny one, there's an agitator usually, there's the one that's kind of the caregiver that tends to kind of run around and kind of make sure, are you doing okay? They don't always say it, but that's kind of like their body language, and they're the facilitator of good vibes. And when that person's gone, there's really no way to fill that hole, and everything shifts. And there's always a slight awkwardness to when you get together, when you sit at the table. It's not just the literal empty chair. It's the empty place. It's the empty role. It's the empty everything that person represented. And our kids feel that too. It's not just us. And it's natural to try to push in and try to fill that place, but it's really impossible because it was a unique spot. It's a puzzle. Only that one person fits right there. And so that's an ongoing thing that shows up over time, every holiday, every family gathering, everything. And I know for our kids, which I didn't realize, I finally asked them. For me, because our kids were most of them were out of the house and they were doing different things, and even James Michael had moved away. It's harder for me when everybody is together because the whole's highlighted. It's like we're all here except, and it's this giant hole. And I asked them, and it's, at least for my children, it's the same for them. It's a lot easier for two or three of us to be together, and one or two over here. It's really hard when we're all together except for Dominic. And now we have two grandchildren, and they don't know Uncle Dominic. We talk about him, but that's not the same thing. It's just not the same thing. And when our son had children, he told me, he says, Mama, I thought I understood, but now I really understand, because his son was extremely premature. And it was really fearful for a long time. So our kids are experiencing this, and they keep on experiencing it. And if we are all blessed to continue to age, they are also going to age. And we're going to keep having to parent them. We're going to keep having to interact with them in the knowledge that we all have experienced loss, not just us. Bereaved siblings can be at greater risk for unhealthy or dangerous behaviors. This is a big one. Bereaved siblings will often, just like bereaved parents, they'll neglect to take care of themselves. Some of them have survivor's guilt, and it does not have to be because they were in the same car, one person died and the other person survived. It's just the literal fact of surviving, and their sibling did not. So be aware, especially if you have children that are at points in life. I call them, they're not technically a crisis, but I call them more like a crux point where decisions are being made. Are they making life choices? Are they making marriage partner choices? Are they deciding where to go to college? Are they deciding what kind of career they want to have? Those are places where you may need to come alongside, not to boss them or tell them what they need to do, but to give them a little more space, a little more grace, a little more support than you might think a 20-year-old or even a 30-year-old might need. And definitely in the younger years, when they're in high school and things like that, because they're going to need that extra support. They're going to need a little bit more encouragement to pause a little longer, to think a little harder, to take their time to make a choice. And it also goes with lifestyle choices. Bereaved siblings are at greater risk for speeding in a car, for addiction, for depression, for anxiety, for basically any kind, sometimes overeating, sometimes over exercising, any kind of an aberrant lifestyle choice that can be made. It is more likely to be made by a bereaved sibling than it is in general for the population of people of the same age. So just be aware of that. And don't assume, we have to be the parent. Don't assume that they're going to grow out of it or that it's just for a moment. Be proactive and ask them the questions that need to be asked. So often we don't want to ask a question we don't want to hear the answer to. And that's a really good policy if you are an attorney and have someone on the witness stand. It's a really crud policy if you're a parent. Ask the question, push, ask. Bereaved siblings often experience attachment disorders. They have a hard time. There are many of them, not all of them, but you'll often find that bereaved siblings find it difficult if they haven't found a life partner to make that commitment to a life partner or to find someone they feel comfortable with. And some siblings find it hard to plan for the future or to pursue meaningful life goals because they feel like, what's the use? Why do I need to get a job? Why do I need to go to college? Why do I need to save? Why do I need to whatever it is? Because what's the point? Their sibling isn't here. They died young. We don't know what tomorrow's going to hold. And we all know that up here. But when you've experienced it, it's like when I was talking about safety, it's one thing to think about all the things that could happen. And it's another thing when it actually happens. You can never pretend that it doesn't happen anymore. And then finally, there's just far fewer resources for bereaved siblings than for bereaved parents, and which I had already touched on before. So before we close, we've got we actually have 8 minutes. Okay. So I want to take questions because I know that's not everything that anybody wanted to know, and I probably don't know it anyway, but we can talk about it. Who has a question? Tell me something that is burning in your mind or in your heart. Yes.